Hello, my name is Kathy Santillo. I'm part of the events team here with Pem as well. And we welcome you to RJ Julia Booksellers. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot to talk about, so I will make this very quick. There will be a signing immediately following on the other side of the store, so please do join us for that if you're available. This evening we have Wendy Holden, who was a journalist for 18 years, including a decade at the Daily Telegraph. She is the author and co-author of more than 30 books, among them several internationally acclaimed wartime biographies, including Born Survivors, which many of us have read and know well, as well as the New York Times bestseller, A Lotus Grows in the Mud with Goldie Hawn, and Lady Blue Eyes with Frank Sinatra's widow, Barbara. She lives in Suffolk, England, with her husband, who may or may not be here, and two dogs who I think they left there. It's her time between the UK and the US. This evening, Wendy is here to discuss the inspirational and uplifting true story of Freddie Hirsch, the teacher of Auschwitz. For his students, he was their guiding light, a 27-year-old gay Jewish athlete, Freddie Hirsch. From the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Dr. Elizabeth Baer provides this review. Haunting and beautiful, excruciatingly vivid, the teacher of Auschwitz is rigorously researched and true to history, powerfully conveying what a smart, loving, and energetic man Freddie was. And another very special review from Dieter Krauss, the librarian of Auschwitz. This novel is the closest possible narrative a person who didn't experience those times could have written, a most important work which will do justice to Freddie and all those victims. Let's get ready to hear more directly from Wendy herself this evening. Thankfully, we will have time for Q&A, and please be sure those cell phones are silenced. Let's enjoy this discussion together. Please help me welcome Wendy Holden.
Thank you very much. Now, the most important thing is, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. If you can't, raise your hand and I'll try and do that or do something or other. But I'm trying not to hold it because I'm going to be reading and I need to have my hands free. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that introduction. Yes, I was a journalist for 18 years and a foreign and war correspondent for a lot of that time. But my connection with war actually began with my father and my mother. My father was much older than all the other fathers in my class at school and all my friends. He had fought the Japanese in Burma and had a very difficult time out there. And my mother's fiance was actually shot dead parachuting into Holland, aged 18. So I grew up with an incredibly healthy respect for war and an understanding that war was not to be taken lightly, it was to be taken very seriously, and that we should all be interested in preventing them. And so when I then became a foreign and war correspondent, especially in the Middle East, and saw the direct effects of war there, I had even more compassion and tolerance and understanding about that. I always say that I left journalism to stay married and stay alive, and my husband Chris is here. We've been together 44 years, so I've done something right, although he does say that the reason we're happily married is because I spent 20 years away from him. So I started to write books, and like all journalists, you often go into ghostwriting because it's an extra form of journalism, really, interviewing somebody about their lives and putting it down in a readable form. But I was drawn back time and again to war and to World War II and latterly to the Holocaust. And that really has become my passion for the last 10 years. So in 2013, I came across a story of Born Survivors, which I know many of you know about. It's been published for 10 years now and has been adopted on the curriculum across the world. It tells the true story of 3 young mothers who hid their pregnancies from the Nazis and gave birth in the camps. And incredibly, all 3 mothers and all 3 babies survived. And best of all, they're all still alive. They were 80 in April, and we were invited back to the concentration camp where they were liberated and where one of them was born at the gates. The others had been born, one on a plank in a factory en route to Mauthausen, and another on a train, an open coal wagon. But they are all 80 years old. They are phenomenal forces of nature, and they have named me their honorary sibling and an honorary Jew. I'm very happy for both. Because I wrote that book, I was asked then to go to Prague in Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, and meet a wonderful woman called Zuzana Ruzicova. It took me a year to learn how to say that. I kept saying Ruzikova for ages. She corrected me, she was like that. She was incredible. She was small, tiny like a bird, grey eyes, smoked like a chimney, consumed an entire bottle of British sherry that I took to her, and ate more than I've ever seen any human eat in one sitting, including my husband. But she was an absolutely incredible human being, and she had survived as a teenage musical prodigy with her mother. She had survived 3 camps, including Bergen-Belsen, which she called the lower level of hell. And it was a very harrowing series of interviews. I spent months and months with her back and forth to Prague, to her apartment. And I noticed that on her desk there were 3 photographs. There was a photograph of her mother, a photograph of her father, and a photograph of this very, very beautiful, athletic-looking young man. And his name was Freddie Hirsch. And when I asked her about Freddie, after weeks of talking about really bleak and terrible things, it was as if a light came on inside her. She just glowed with happiness. Her eyes sparkled. She was so full of joy talking about this incredible, inspirational young man who had done so much for her, not just during the war, but afterwards, in terms of his morality, in terms of the lessons he taught her. And I was really stunned because I realized that when she was talking about some of the happiest moments of her entire life, but they had happened in Auschwitz. And I couldn't believe that nobody really had written about Freddie Hirsch, that nobody really had explored more about him, to find out about him and find out what was so special about him. So I started to write it actually as a non-fiction biography. I was going to write it as a non-fiction biography. It's my métier really as a journalist. I like true stories. I've written novels, several novels, but this was something I wanted to write as a biography. But as my research carried on and I dug deeper and deeper, I realized that I was running out of material. There just wasn't enough material about Freddie Hirsch. So it was a difficult decision for me because I've been made a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society in Britain. I'm very painfully aware of the embellishment of the Holocaust in some quarters and about inaccuracies and how that unfortunately can muddy the water for the rest of us. So I was very worried about it, but I decided that I would plough on, and I decided that I would be completely transparent. So at the back of the book, every fictional character is listed along with the real life characters. And even the fictional characters, each one of them comes from a snippet of information, a nugget, a name, a mention of somebody, and then I've just fleshed them out. And I've fleshed Freddie out, talking in his voice as if he was speaking to you. And that was really important to me because I really wanted everybody who was reading it to go on a journey with Freddie, to go on his journey and understand him, because I don't give away the ending of the book, a bit like a thriller, I suppose. I don't want to give away the ending of the book for lots of reasons, but also because I want you to come to that yourselves, having gone through that journey with him and seeing what it is that he actually has done. So before I talk about Freddie and who he is, I'm actually just going to read something for you. This is a 1 page, this is just the prologue. This is how I decided to start the book. My name is Alfred Hirsch, although my friends call me Freddie. Please be so kind as to remember my name. The word Hirsch means stag in German, and like a deer, I've been on the run for much of my life. Today, the hunting of Freddie Hirsch may end in a kill. I'm not afraid for myself, but for the children in my care. They are all I've focused on since the world started burning, and I shudder to think what might become of them. My name is Freddie Hirsch. I'm 28 years old. I'm a teacher. I'm a dreamer. I'm not just a number, nor will I be identified by the yellow triangle I've been forced to wear. My name is Freddie Hirsch, and I've fought to maintain a vestige of normality and decency in this hellish world. I have laughed and laughed, cried and almost died 1,000 times. My name is Freddie Hirsch. I'm a good man. Please be so kind as to remember my name. So that's Freddie. He's in the room with us now. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He grew up in Aachen in Germany. He was the youngest of two boys. His brother Paul was very keen to become a rabbi from an early age, and indeed did become so. Freddie was a little feckless. He didn't quite have an idea about what he wanted to do in life, but he loved outdoors. He loved being outdoors in nature. Aachen's very beautiful. I don't know if any of you have ever been, but it's in a tree-lined valley. There's forests, there's lakes. He loved to swim, he loved to bird watch, and he found great solace in nature. And that became really important because at the age of 10, his father died very suddenly. His father was a butcher. His mother, he didn't ever seem to really get on terribly well with. And after his father died unexpectedly, his mother took off for a year, left the children in the care of somebody else. And when she returned, she came back with another husband. And it was somebody that Freddie didn't get on particularly well with. He and his brother had joined the Scout movement, which was massively popular in the 1930s around the world. And they were members of the Jewish Scouts. Obviously, they were Jewish. And Freddie found something out about himself in the Scouts. He discovered that not only was he really good at scouting, particularly all the outdoors sort of orienteering kind of stuff, but he was terrific at looking after the younger children, nurturing them, caring for them, seeing what it was they needed, looking after the one that lagged behind, finding a way for somebody who wasn't so good at sports to do something else. And so he ended up very quickly being risen through the ranks to become a youth leader. And he loved it. He was also a fantastic athlete. There are amazing photographs of him, incredibly athletic. He did long jump and he did calisthenics and he did high jump and all sorts of wonderful things. He kept himself very fit. His inspiration was his uncle, Alfred, he was named after, who was a tailor, who was very, very well dressed and had how he described it as a Prussian bearing, which meant ramrod straight back and always looking very nice, nicely dressed. Make sure you had clean fingernails, make sure that you were presentable. And he took that to extremes. He really always looked spick and span, as he put it. And he instilled that in the younger children. He would have them inspect their fingernails before they were even allowed to eat or do anything. And he tried to instill in them a sense of discipline. And this was very important because anti-Semitism was rising across Germany and indeed Europe, but particularly in Germany. And there were more and more attacks on Jews in the streets and more propaganda against them. And Freddie, naively perhaps, believed that as long as he and his little troop of scouts did well, did a kind deed every day, the scout motto, dressed nicely, behaved impeccably, then they would turn the tide. They would be able to turn people against this rise in anti-Semitism, and they would be able to have some sort of make some sort of headway, going back to some level of normality and compassion. So unfortunately for him, that didn't happen. And as the Nazis rose to power, they stopped all boys being members of any youth groups other than the Hitler Youth. And of course, he couldn't be a member of the Hitler Youth because he was Jewish. And he was devastated because not only was he hoping to become a full-time youth leader, but he was also hoping to become an Olympian. He was so good at athletics and he was winning so many competitions that he thought that that would be his future. And of course, the idea of being in the German Olympics at that time as a Jew was an impossible dream. It was never going to happen. He stayed in Germany for a while. He left home at 15, unhappy at home, and he went to work for various scouting and youth groups around Germany. And he was always much admired and loved by the children. But eventually, when things got too bad with the Nazi Nuremberg laws, he decided that he would flee and he would go somewhere else. It was the only thing he could do. And the only place that he could think of to go was Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic as it is now. And that was because it was a close country, it was just across the border. And even though the language is impenetrable, I still find it very difficult to deal with. He had the people that ran the groups that he was part of had groups there, and he knew that he would be able to walk straight into youth leadership. He did that straight away. He went to first Brno and then on to Prague. And in Brno, he met somebody, a young male doctor, a student doctor called Gender. And all his life, Freddie had been perplexed by why he wasn't attracted to girls when all his fellow friends, his other scouts and youth leaders, were attracted to girls and talked about girls and dreamed about girls and wanted to know about girls. And this left Freddie cold. He didn't know that, he didn't understand it. And when he met Gender, he fell in love, and they had a relationship in Brno and then later in Prague that really changed his life, because I think then for the first time in his late teens, he really came out of himself in the way that, not that we mean now come out, because it was extremely dangerous for him. He was in double jeopardy for being Jewish and gay. Gays under Nazi Germany were considered impure. A gay Jew was considered doubly impure and an enemy of the Reich. And gays were rounded up, they were arrested, they were tortured, some of them were killed, and many of them were forcibly castrated. So it was very important for him not to reveal that side of him. He focused always on the children. When he got to Prague, and there were so many German refugee children who had come also with their families into Czechoslovakia, who didn't speak Czech and didn't understand anything, Freddie was able to help them because he spoke German. And he was able to set up a sports ground, actually, for them in the north of Prague. And hundreds of children went there. It was their respite. They went every single week and met Freddie, and they just loved it. It was the only place they were free. They could do anything they wanted, and Freddie was incredible. He was incredible for lots of reasons, not just as a natural, charismatic youth leader, but because he was living in a world where it was really dangerous to draw attention to yourself, particularly as he was gay and Jewish. You didn't catch anybody's eye in authority, especially not the Nazis. You certainly wouldn't make eye contact with anybody. You kept your head down, you kept your nose clean, you really stuck to your own business and didn't do anything that would draw attention to yourself. And Freddie risked everything repeatedly from late teens onwards by standing up to these people, by refusing to be a bystander to evil and hate and demanding things from the Germans. The Germans capitalized on hope throughout the whole of their reign, really. They knew that there was always going to be hope, and that the Jews would always hope that the war would end, the Nuremberg laws would be banned, people would change, people would step up, something like that. So he saw that the way they turned that around on them, and he decided to capitalize on the Germans' need for discipline and order. The one thing the Germans couldn't control, no matter how much they controlled everything else, were small children. Small children don't understand that they've got to stand in line. They don't understand that they've got to wait for the soup that's being fed to them at soup kitchens. They just want to play. They want to be out and about. They don't want to be crammed into barracks and so on. And Freddie realised very early on that he could do something about this that would please the Germans and please their desperate need for order and discipline. So when he was sent to the ghetto in Terezin, which was known as the Showcase Ghetto, it was one of the first big Jewish ghettos set up in Europe. And they were told, by the way, that they were going there for their own safety, because by then people were being attacked in the streets openly and there was a lot of hatred around. So they said, we're going to put you in this fortified town. It's an hour north of Prague. You'll have all be together. You can do what you like and you'll be safe. And we'll have guards guard you. And people believed that. They not only believed it, several of them gave up their entire fortunes to move there on the promise of having south-facing balconies and wonderful apartments and houses and things. And of course, when they got there, it wasn't anything like that. It was a derelict, waterlogged barracks without electricity, without hospital, without kitchens, without anything. And the people who were there to try and help them, including Freddie, who was made the youth leader, had a hell of a job trying to sort of pull the things together. There were a lot of suicides. A lot of people arrived there and killed themselves straight away. Freddie saw that these children were trapped in these barracks, and he decided to get them out and get them into kinderheims, into children's homes. He saw that there were professors and artists and wonderful people there who were dying of boredom and fear and starvation and disease, and he got them to teach the children. And he was an incredible leader to them all and did wonderful things. He continued to defy the Nazis on a daily basis. He would go to the commandant's office, he would stand straight, he would salute, he would make direct eye contact, click his heels together, and tell them what he needed for the children. And they admired his chutzpah, they admired his courage, they admired the fact that he was always so beautifully dressed, and his hair seemed to be clean in a place where there were no washing facilities. They thought he was, somebody said, if you weren't a Jew, you'd made a wonderful member of the Waffen SS. He traded on that. He fooled them, actually. He played them as much as they played him. But the one thing he wasn't allowed to do was disobey their direct orders. And when a trainload of orphans came into Terezin, this ghetto, from Bialystok, and something unusual happened. They weren't distributed to the distribution centre to be quarantined and then sent into the ghetto. They were kept on the train in incredible heat, and they were an awful situation. And Freddie defied orders and jumped over the wall to go and see them. And his punishment was to be sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Nobody knew what Auschwitz was. They had never heard of it. All they were told was that they were going to be sent east on trains, and they believed it was to labour camps. And as a lot of them had already survived in the ghetto for a number of years, some of them up to 3 years, having a horrible life and really half-starved to death and worked to death in many instances, they still believed that this would be better to be together. So they volunteered to go east, not realising they were going to Auschwitz and to the gas chambers. But Freddie was in a very unusual position, because when he was sent in 1943, the Nazis had been absolutely plagued by the Red Cross. What's happened to all the Jews? Where have all the Jews gone from Eastern Europe? You've got them in ghettos. Where are they? Well, we need to come and visit them. We need to see them. You have some of the finest, greatest minds in the world there. We need to find out what's happening to them. Where are the musicians? And the Nazis realised that they couldn't hold them off any longer. So they did, in fact, after Freddie had left Terezin, invite the Red Cross to Terezin to see it. And you may have seen some of the propaganda film that were made there. They beautified it. They sent something like 2,500 sick and dying and skinny people to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. They brought in new, fatter, healthier looking ones. They put flowers in the window boxes. They created fake shops. They created fake cafeterias. They put on a football match for them. Freddie was the one that started the football matches. And the Red Cross swallowed it hook, line and sinker. So they believed that it was fine and they went away. But they were still worried about where they were going east. And they were threatening to go east and see them as well. So Freddie was really lucky, because on the transport of people he was sent to Auschwitz on, 4,500 men, women and children, it happened to be the one transport that the Nazis decided not to send straight to the gas chambers, or to select the ones who could be used for slave labour, who could be sent to factories to be worked to death. They decided to put them into one camp known as the Czech family camp, and they would all be there. They wouldn't have their heads shaved. They wouldn't have to wear striped uniforms. They could be men, women and children together. They could be largely self-governing up to a point. And they could do whatever it was that they needed to do. And then if the Red Cross came, they could say, look, here they all are. They're not wearing uniforms, they're all fine, and you don't have to worry about them. But of course, the Red Cross never came, so that was a big dilemma for them in the end. He got to Auschwitz, and yet again, he saw at the roll calls, Germans insisted on roll calls every morning, which they hadn't insisted on in Terezin. But in Auschwitz they did. 4,500 people standing to attention for up to 5-6 hours at a time, in all weathers, men, women and children. A lot of the old people dropped dead, literally died at the scene. The pregnant women, they were also in a terrible situation. And the children, of course, didn't understand. They were running around, they were running between legs, they were tugging on breeches, they were being an absolute nuisance. And Freddie decided he was going to do something about it. He discovered that there was an empty block at the far end of the camp, block 31, and he decided that he would challenge the SS who ran that particular camp, and particularly Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death. He decided he would challenge him directly and tell them, listen, I'll take the children. They can sleep in the barracks. The children slept with the mothers in the barracks, and the men were on their own on the other side. I'll take the children in the morning. They will come to this block 31. I will get them fed. I will camp them inside, away from the weather, away from you. I will give you the numbers. You can come in and check. It's fine. And I will keep them there all day, out of the way, until the evening roll call is over, and then they can go back to the barracks. And Mengele said, this is a good idea. Yeah, okay, you can do it. But of course, Freddie, once he got one privilege, just kept pushing. He just kept pushing. Okay, so I've got to feed them, right? So you normally bring the soup in these great barrels that people have to carry. I say soup. They live largely on a diet of water. It was ersatz coffee in the morning, which was a black liquid that tastes like petrol. Lunch was soup, which was a thin broth that, well, goodness alone know what it was made from. But if you were lucky, you got something from the bottom of the barrel, maybe a bit of potato or a bit of onion, anything to chew on. They had a tiny piece of what we would call in England rye bread, like black rye bread, that often had baked insects into it. And then in the evening, they had coffee again. So that was it. But somebody had to make the soup. And Freddie said, listen, if I get the fires lit in my barracks, then I can get pots and I can make the soup for the children. They won't disrupt the dishing out of the soup, which was a chaotic time of the day. And again, they agreed. There was a very interesting situation in these barracks. They were actually stables for horses. And you've probably seen pictures of Auschwitz. They've got tall chimneys at either end. So the tall chimneys at either end were joined in the middle by a horizontal flue that ran about this high, brick all the way through. And if you lit the fire at one end and lit the other, it drew and the hot air would come through this and warm the stables for the horses. But of course, if you had people in there, that was wonderful because you could sit on it and you could huddle a little bit closer. It was bitterly cold. Those winters were the bitterest winters in European history for 15 years. But if you had that little bit of heat, it was the only flue, the only chimney, the only block that had a fire. And Freddie had the children, some of the older children, make the soup. He went to the resistance, and there was resistance in Auschwitz. The people who looked after the big storage area where all the belongings of all the Jews that were sent to the gas chambers, not just Jews, other homosexuals, literati, Jehovah's Witnesses, anybody that was considered an enemy of the Reich, all their belongings were put in this storage room, huge areas which the prisoners called Canada. And they called it Canada because in those days, Canada seemed to them like the land of milk and honey, the land of plenty. And it was the land of plenty. And Freddie was able to speak to the resistance and get a little extra vegetables or a little extra soup. He was able to get books, a few books from the children, but they were random books. They were whatever people had in their suitcases. There was the study of psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud. There was an atlas. And I don't know if any of you have read The Librarian of Auschwitz, which was a novel based on a true story of Dieter Krauss, who very kindly said those wonderful things about my book that made me cry. And she was one of the children who was entrusted to look after those few books and hide them from the Nazis as the Nazis came in. And Freddie looked around this barracks with his children and his teenagers who had been brought in to help him, because he also was trying to save them from the horror of the barracks where people are dying in their hundreds every single day. And he had them enlisted to help with the younger children. He looked around the barracks and he thought, this is a little drab. And he had met an artist, a young artist called Dina Gottliebova, who he'd known first of all actually in Brno, then in Prague, and then in the ghetto. And she was a wonderful artist who hoped one day to become a cartoonist for Disney. And by the way, she did become a cartoonist. And the reason she wanted to be a cartoonist for Disney was because, like almost everybody in the camp, the last film they had seen before the Nazis took hold was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was a miracle. It was a miraculous film for these children to have seen and for everybody to have seen. And Dina saw it so often, 7 times she saw it. And in the last few times she saw it, she hid her yellow star. She wasn't allowed in cinema as a Jew, but she hid her yellow star and went in. So she knew it intimately. And when Freddie asked her, would she paint the walls to make them less drab, she started drawing little cartoons and colourful pots on a wall, like a Swiss scene with cows and so on. And then she turned and she realised that all the children were standing watching her. Oh, man. These little mice, as Freddie called them, skinny little ragged mice. And she said, well, what would you like me to paint? And all of them said Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it was wonderful. And she painted it, and actually she recreated it for Yad Vashem after the war. And it's a beautiful thing. It's full of colour. And so Freddie also decided that he would teach them songs. He told the Germans, I'm going to teach them German songs and I'm going to teach them German orders so that they'll understand you if they have to obey your orders. Don't worry about that. And of course, they thought this was also a good idea. They needed to understand German orders. If the Red Cross came, they needed to know that. So they were told that every time a Nazi came into the barrack, they had to immediately switch to German. They immediately switched to German songs. But when the Nazis weren't there, they made up all sorts of things. And Freddie decided to put on a production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Only he had something like 38 dwarfs. Because every single child wanted to be a dwarf, and he just made up names for them, and he did wonderful things for them. And unbelievably, the SS came in to watch it. And I'm just going to read you something about that. Someday my prince will come. Helga's voice rose like a bird to the rafters of Block 31 and took flight in my heart. Standing on the chimney, dressed as Snow White with a strip of red cloth in her hair and a cardboard collar stitched to a belted shirt, the willowy teenager transported us to another world. Accompanying her on my recorder as she sang of dreams coming true, I played the handsome prince, dressed in a sacking cape and a paper crown made by Dina. All around me stood the dwarves, their eyes sparkling in the light of oil lamps placed at the front of our stage. Reciting their lines with enthusiasm, they looked as if they didn't have a care in the world. A true collective, just as I had taught them. They'd step in to improvise if anybody faltered or forgot their words. Closing my eyes to focus on Helga's beautiful voice, I imagined lying in my childhood forest listening to songbirds. Gone was the stench of burning human flesh, replaced by the sweet scent of pine, the defining aroma of my youth. Feeling knots unravelling in my gut, I could almost see the clear waters of the lake fringed with wildflowers as colourful butterflies danced all around. Opening my eyes again, my heart was filled with love for Helga, who was giving her all to her performance under a sheen of makeup applied to mask the effects of the tuberculosis. All through rehearsal, she coughed and coughed, but somehow tonight she didn't, and I gave her an encouraging smile. Turning to our audience, I studied those in the front row. SS officers sat in tight-fitting uniforms and white gloves, smiling up at those they intended to murder. Among them sat Mengele, who'd recently assumed control of the children's book after arguing that it fell under his jurisdiction. No doubt he wanted to take the credit for our success. Alongside him were officials from other camps, openly astounded to be watching a musical staged by children in the dark heart of Auschwitz. Focusing on the sweet, unformed faces of my cast, I hoped I'd been able to instill some sense of decency in them all and protect them from the worst of camp life. Brick by brick, I'd tried to build a wall in their hearts against suffering. If I'd done one thing for them, I'd given them their moment in the limelight, because in a different life they'd have starred in school productions, taking their bows in front of proud parents before returning home for hot chocolate and a slice of poppy seed cake. Instead, they were in a place their worst nightmares could never have conjured. Helga's heavenly voice lifted above us all. Mesmerized, I drew strength from the purity of the song, and especially the thought that when the birds sing again in springtime, love will blossom and dreams come true. A short distance beyond our lamplit walls, thousands more parched and broken prisoners were being marched in tattered lines towards the gas chambers. Even above the music, we'd heard the dreadful rumble of the trucks. As they battled through the snow to what they'd been promised for warm showers, some may even have heard Helga's sweet, sentimental song. I only hope it gave them some solace before they were turned to ash. So I told you I'm not going to tell you what happened to Freddie here, because I want you to find out for yourself, but I do want you to appreciate and realise that he was the most extraordinary man. After the war, he was denigrated. He was denigrated for several reasons. The communists took over that part of the world, and they were very both anti-Semitic and homophobic. And he checked both boxes, really. They thought he was a pervert, as they called him, and they called him a collaborator. Well, of course he collaborated with the Nazis. He had to collaborate with the Nazis to get things he wanted for the children. But that's why it was so difficult for me to finish his story, because any documents that they had come across, they had destroyed. And so there was really nothing about him anyway. He wasn't a person of any one creed, race, or colour. He was simply a frightened young man who was doing the very best he could for so many frightened children. And it's such an honour and a privilege for me to be able to cover these incredible stories in fiction or non-fiction and bring them to a world that appears to be burning again. Hope, they say, is a candle in the darkness. And the best thing about a candle in the darkness is the million candles can be lit from it. Freddie is such a candle. Thank you.
So if you'd like to take a couple of questions now, if we have them, and then we'll go to the signing lines.
Might have stunned you into silence.
You did all that research and you looked at how the Nazis came to power and took over, changed laws, and the sentiment changed and the world turned against them. The correlation to what you see now, as we discussed before, what do you see? What are your concerns?
The question was that I did so much research into the rise of anti-Semitism and the Nazis, and that we're seeing a mirroring of that now. And what does that raise, and what are my concerns? I will tell you that Susanna, she died. I worked with her in September, up until September 2017, and she had cancer. She was 19. She didn't seem at all unwell. And when I was leaving her on that Friday, she looked up at me and said, "Do you have everything you need?" And I said, "I think I do, Susanna. I think I do. But I'll be back in February and we'll go through it all together and it'll be fine. Do you have everything you need?" And I said, "I do." And she said, "Okay." And she died on a Tuesday. So she never even saw her own book come out. But she asked me to write Freddie's story. She begged me to write Freddie's story. She said, "You are the person that needs to write Freddie's story." It took me a while because I was a bit busy, but I did do it in the end. But she spoke to me about the time, the mood in Europe then, in the world then actually, and particularly about the rise of anti-Semitism in what was former Eastern Europe. And she told me that she felt that the world was repeating itself with dreadful symmetry. And I never forgot that phrase, dreadful symmetry. And it seems to me that we seem to be repeating our mistakes, human mistakes, with dreadful symmetry over and over again, not just in the obvious places, but with the Uyghurs in China and everywhere else that anybody is being persecuted and treated badly. And I spend a lot of time talking in schools. It's really important work to me. It's new work for me. It wasn't something I ever did until I came across this work. And I'm really happy and proud to do so, because I need to talk to the next generation about this. And I need to teach them, we all need to teach them, to have a respect for difference, no matter what that difference is. And I think Freddie's example is such a great example of that. And I think all we can do, as Susanna said, was do what we each can do. Each of us should be candles and try and help the next generation in particular, because that's where our future is. I always pleased to see young people in the audience. When I see young people in the audience, it means a lot to me. Thank you for coming, because it's really important that the next generation takes this on board. And that's the only way. We can't fight it. How can we stop what's happening in Ukraine or anywhere? We can't do anything about that. We're helpless in that regard, but we aren't helpless here in our homes with our own children, with our friends' children, talking about the importance of that. That's what I think. Any other questions? Hi.
Why do you
I'm a little hard of hearing, so
why do you think Jews have been victimized? What steps did you get in doing your research? What have you understood about the victimization, Semitism, its origin?
Somebody asked me that recently, and the truth is, I really don't know, other than that it is different. And a difference and racism of all sorts comes particularly when a particular group looks different in some ways, behaves in a different way to everybody else, has different rituals and different traditions and different customs that other people don't understand or don't bother to find out about. But honestly, I think that it could boil down to the colour of one's eyes sometimes. I think if people, it's in human nature, very sadly, it's in human nature to attack the underdog, to attack somebody who is different to you. And I think it could boil down to some things that somebody told me some years ago that it was because originally Christians weren't allowed to lend money, and the only people that could lend money were Jews. And so they were the money lenders, and who do we all hate? Generally, bankers. So, you know, I say that jokingly, you know, obviously we don't hate bankers, we love bankers. But, you know, there is that sense of if they're the people that come in knocking on the door and asking for their dividend or their money back, then that's an issue. And if they also happen to look different and they also happen to observe certain rituals that we don't understand or which frighten us. And when people are frightened, they react in anger, unfortunately. That is also human nature. But again, we can counter it, I hope, by opening up those communities much more and bringing people into those communities, bringing Muslims, whoever, into our communities and saying, tell us about your food, tell us about your rituals, tell us what it means to you, tell us why you don't do this or you do that. We really want to know and be part of that community. It's so important. Good question, thank you. Gentlemen, sorry, something right now. That was it. Hi.
In answer to him, Sarah Horn's People Not Dead Jews is a great book.
Excuse me, I didn't hear.
You can hear the book of People Not Dead Jews by Sarah Horn. Her theory is that Jews always were non-conformed because of majority culture, so they represented freedom, and autocrats don't like freedom.
Yes.
So they were constantly a threat, so they need to be scapegoated in whatever way possible.
Yes.
Anyway, my question for you is, you said like 10 years ago you started focusing on the Holocaust, and I wondered what made you shift to that.
Oh, it was really just coming across the Born Survivor story. So I was always, as a journalist, and particularly as a war correspondent, looking for the humanity in the inhumanity. Those were the stories that appealed to me. My father was the most influential person in my life, second to my husband, I should say. And he was incredible. He was born in India. He lived in India for the first 27 years of his life. His father was a British colonial. Actually, he was one of 7 children, and 6 of them married Indians. And he had 2 words to say about anything and everything, and the 2 words were "be kind." And that really struck with me, and it struck with you know, my siblings as well, I think. And it's just such an important thing to try and practice on a daily basis. Did I answer your question? What was the actual question? I'm so sorry.
Why did you shift to the?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. So I have always been interested in the Holocaust. I think a lot of teenage girls in particular, that a lot of my school audiences are teenage girls. The boys tend to stay away. I don't know why that is. I think maybe because teenage girls grow up faster and have sort of more understanding about the world. And then so I've read a lot about the Holocaust. I was interested in the Holocaust generally, but not specifically for any reason. I read about other wars and other prejudices too. But I was reading an obituary late at night it was a friend's newspaper in Canada, and it was about a woman who was in her 80s who died, and she had been in Auschwitz and she'd given birth to a baby and had been taken away and drowned in a bucket in front of her. And I was so shocked and so horrified by that. And she had devoted her life to Holocaust education, to tell people this happened. I was there. I saw it. This happened. It didn't not happen. It happened. And I then thought, I wonder if any babies did survive the Holocaust. And I thought, well, go figure, probably not, because that was the whole plan, to wipe out the Jews. And then I discovered that there was this one baby that I'd read about, Eva Clark, and her mother Anka had given birth to her at the gates of Mauthausen. And if she lived in Australia, I'd have gotten a plane to go and see her, because I thought the story was so extraordinary and it hadn't been written. But my second piece of luck was that she lived an hour and a half away from me in Cambridge, England. And I went to see her, and we spent a day together. It was a very emotional day for both of us, but especially for her, because her mother had just died 6 months prior. So I only just missed her at 96. And when I finished the day with her, I said, would you do me the very great honour of letting me write your mother's story? And she reached out and touched my arm and said, I've been waiting for you for 70 years. And that then started that. And then this and this and this. Susanna's book, 100 Miracles. an incredible book. There was such a legacy to her life and her resilience. But she ended up becoming the music of Johann Sebastian Bach had saved her in the camps. And she, when she came back out of the Holocaust as a teenager, her hands were virtually fossilized and she'd lost all her fingerprints because of slave labor. But she went back to grade one piano and she became the world's leading Baroque musician and the only person on the planet ever to have recorded the entire keyboard works of Bach. I mean, those are the people I want in my life.
What a wonderful way to end our time.